Prosperity and Livability Committee to order today. In council chambers, we have Councilmember Britt Moore and Councilmember Cyril Jefferson with us. We have 3 items on our agenda today. The first is a presentation by Ready for School, Ready for Life program, and I will turn that over. The podium's yours. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharice Hart, and I am the CEO of Ready for School, Ready for Life. And I'm really pleased and happy to join you this morning to share a little bit about the work that we are leading, focused on early childhood development in Guilford County, and also emphasize our work in High Point today. So I will now share my presentation. All right, wonderful. So our mission at Ready for School, Ready for Life is that we are a collaborative effort to build a connected, innovative system of care for Guilford County's youngest children and their families. And the reason why this very young organization started just a few years ago is because we noticed a trend, a decrease in kindergarten preparedness year over year. So if you look at the statistics in front of you, you'll see, according to the Dynamic Indicators for Basic Early Literacy Skills, also known as DIBELS, you'll see that in 2015-16, approximately 63% of students were prepared for kindergarten. And then year over year, that continued to decrease, and you'll see that 50% number in 2018, 2019, and that's right before the pandemic hit. And then we had a couple of years of gap years because we weren't able to collect those that data. And then you'll see when the students got back to normal learning, we saw that 27% of students were prepared for kindergarten. That's a significant decrease, and we have an issue because if we want to ensure that all of these students are growing up in a healthy community and are able to join our workforce, they need to be prepared for kindergarten, and it doesn't start at kindergarten, it starts earlier than that. So you'll also see the disparities between whites and then children of color. And so we have a lot of work to do in our community. I know this slide is very hard to see, but I'll just quickly highlight the timeline of Ready for School, Ready for Life. Again, we're a very young initiative. The steering committee met in 2014, 2016. And we had maybe 2 staff members that worked part-time under the Guilford County Partnership for Children. In 2017, we had a convening where we invited business leaders across Guilford County to learn more about our work. And at that convening, we did not know that the Duke Endowment was in the audience and that they were actually seeking an initiative to invest in a community. So we didn't know that. And luckily, in 2018, they selected Ready for School, Ready for Life to be the recipient of an investment from the Duke Endowment and then Blue Meridian Partners, which is a mega investment fund based out of New York City. There are only 2 organizations in the entire nation doing this type of work. One is Ready for School, Ready for Life in Guilford County, and our partner is the Duke Endowment, and the other is Tulsa Best, based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and their key partner is the George Kaiser Family Foundation. So in 2018, we became a 501c3. In 2019, I joined the organization. I'm very happy to come back to my home community. I am a High Point native. And actually, we started piloting a few programs, which I'll explain a little bit later. And then in 2021, we were very pleased that we were able to leverage some funding from our North Carolina General Assembly. Ready for School, Ready for Life is a backbone organization, meaning we don't provide direct services. Instead, we invest in services and programs that have demonstrated evidence, and we want to make them collaborate, work together, partner to, one, save money, but also make it easier for families, because you can only imagine that when a family or a parent is referred to services, it becomes very challenging and difficult, and they often give up. So why invent new programs? Instead, just make these programs work together and invest in them so they can increase their capacity and ability to serve all of the children in Guilford County. So this is our belief system and our system of care. We believe it takes a strong community, resources, agencies, organizations. We need transportation, education, safe housing, early childhood development, affordable, high-quality childcare, food security, and then ultimately that leads us to a strong child development. So I'm going to go back to the point I made about expanding and integrating proven programs. So you'll see there are three proven programs that we've identified in Guilford County, and these programs do serve Greensboro and High Point. One is Family Connects, which is based out of the Guilford County Health Department, and that ensures that every child born in our community has an opportunity to receive a one-time home visit from a nurse. It's free. It's for all people, regardless of their socioeconomic status. The next program is Nurse Family Partnership. That program is more for what I would call at-risk children or mothers. You'll see a lot of younger mothers in this program, and it allows a home visiting nurse, to work with a pregnant woman prenatally all the way up until the child is born in age 2. And then the Healthy Steps program, we've decided to expand that program in pediatric offices across Greensboro and High Point, because we noticed that if you want to meet parents where they are, you're more than likely to reach them at the pediatric office. They're going to go to those well child visits. And so everyone in Guilford County, once they go to their pediatric office for that first well child visit, they have an opportunity to meet with the Healthy Steps specialist, which is normally a clinical social worker or counselor. And they have the opportunity to be screened. And if they seem like they're on track and there's a good parent-child relationship, we typically just say, we're going to keep track on you. If you need us, call us. But if we notice that there are some trends that warrant some additional services, then that's where they will continue to work with their Healthy Steps specialist all the way up until age 3. And so, how do we bridge all of these programs together? It's not easy, but it's fun, because every proven program, they often think that their program alone is going to solve the world's problems, and it doesn't. So you have to make sure that they are working together and they're working collaboratively. And so that's where Routes to Ready was formed. Routes to Ready ensures that every OBGYN practice in Guilford County has an opportunity to have a Routes to Ready community navigator embedded in that practice. It's often overwhelming for OBGYN or obstetricians or gynecologists to focus on their healthcare services when a pregnant person says, I don't have food, I don't have shelter. That's time that the doctor has to stop what they're doing and spend with the patient. But instead, now they're able to call in a navigator, and if that parent-to-be needs additional services, and refer them to that parent, and then that allows the doctor to continue providing healthcare services. It saves time, it saves money. Over the next few years, we're going to be presenting some data on how much time we're saving in these physician offices. Very happy to say that we are in every OBGYN practice in High Point. And then the next question is, how are you going to keep track of all of this data? How do you know that you're going to be successful? Our goal is long-term population level change, and it's going to take a long time to start making upward trends in that data I shared with you earlier. Because again, we believe that it starts prenatally, and then that's where we ensure that kindergarten preparedness and then ultimately success in life. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of data to track all of this. So we're forming an integrated data system that's going to go live in January 2023. We have a governance council where we have those evidence-based programs serve on the council. The county serves on that council, and we are ensuring that we are coordinating these services. We have to save money, and we also have to make sure that when we're making referrals, that these referrals are truly needed. And oftentimes we're investing in programs because it sounds good to us. That's great. We need to start looking at the data to make sure that these are services that parents need. So anytime they're meeting with that community navigator or that home visiting nurse or that Healthy Steps specialist, they tell those leaders, they tell those workers what they need. And so that goes into the system, and then we're able to see trends on what the highest needs are, and that allows us to determine where to invest our money and resources. We don't want to invest in program A when people are telling us they need program B. And so again, the live starts January 2023. We're also going to be able to track data on children. It will be anonymous. Children will only be identified through a unique identifier. I won't know if it's child A or child B. It will only be 00123. That's all that we'll know. Parents will be able to track their data and track these assessments so that they can see whether or not their children are on track and ready for kindergarten. We will only track it for data purposes. So it's a win-win for parents, and it's a win for our work at Ready for School, Ready for Life to support our communities. Another effort I just want to share before I wrap up is the Basics Guilford. The Basics Guilford started out of Harvard University as the Boston Basics, and they have Basics communities all across the country, and I'm very pleased that we are one in Guilford County. It was started by Dr. Ron Ferguson, and there are basically 5 simple, easy ways that parents or caregivers can interact with their children. And we have worked with all sorts of organizations across High Point to implement the basics. And these are just the list of some of the organizations that we've worked with. The High Point Housing Authority, actually just last year, we actually developed a reading and resource room at the High Point, one of the High Point Housing Authority communities. The High Point Public Library, we work with, I believe, Jim Zola, who's the head of Children's Services there, Family Service at the Piedmont, of course, all the county services. I mentioned earlier, we're at most of the pediatric offices and OBGYN practices in our community. And actually, we have developed book nooks and a couple of barbershops in partnership with the March of Dimes and the American Heart Association. So you'll see those listed there. And of course, we have trained all of the Head Start and Early Head Start leaders and teachers in this area. And the last thing that we're doing, we're having a stakeholder convening next month. It's going to be in High Point at the Blue Heron. And it's just a celebration for all those who support our work across the community. So we just wanted to make sure that we mention that as well. And one last accomplishment that I'll share before I conclude is that since our founding in 2018, Ready for School, Ready for Life, in partnership with all of our evidence-based programs, we have created 85 jobs and decent wage jobs in our community. These are not just jobs where, people feel like they're not being recognized. These are jobs where they're being paid decently, and they're jobs that benefit our most vulnerable citizens in our community. So I'm really proud of that accomplishment, and we have more to come as we continue to expand our work from prenatal to age 3, from ages 3 to 8. So I'll leave you with this. Every child deserves a great start in life, but not every child starts from the same place. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Absolutely. Questions, comments? I know you have plenty on this one.
Who, me?
Everybody, I have plenty to say about this.
Yeah, no, I have a lot of thoughts, and admittedly, first I want to say thank you, Sharice, for coming in, and appreciate Chairman Hudson allowing us to have this presentation. Over the past few years, I know I've had the pleasure of learning more about early childhood and the needs surrounding that. And as I begin to learn and to hear and to be in these spaces, some common themes sort of rise up in terms of what the big picture here is. And so I think, as a government, we often have that job of ensuring that this city can be sustained for many, many generations once we're done here. And often what that looks like is us ensuring that as a community, we are in a great standing. And that means financially and a number of other things that we could talk about in terms of how livable it is, how safe it is, and how prosperous it is. And what I love about Ready and the work that it's doing is that, quite frankly, it creates this collaboration among stakeholders that positions our community in a unique way. As Sharice alluded to, only Guilford County and Tulsa are doing these two things. And what you see from that collaboration is more efficiency, right? Because people aren't having to take as much time to get through things because they're learning together. There's a lot of evidence-based things that are taking place, so we're not wasting as much time with trying to get stuff figured out. There's this reduction in gaps in terms of who's getting what. And it really elevates conversations. And so some of the conversations that have been elevated, I think I mentioned in our last P&L meeting, as a matter of fact, and if I'm not mistaken, it may be one of the reasons why we end up getting this update today that's coming right after this about the transportation and transit expansion, is that a few weeks ago, as a result, you mentioned Healthy Steps, Sharice. Healthy Steps did a needs assessment in which they talked about what are some of the barriers that get in the way of families being able to get what they need in terms of getting to their visits and getting all the great things that Sharice just talked about. One of those big things that bubbled up to the surface was transportation as a huge need in terms of that happening. And so I think about what she's presenting today and all the work that they're doing and how the ramifications of our community getting this right, how we create this pipeline of early childhood through K-12, through adults, in the workforce development that comes with that, the economic development that comes with that. We know companies ask us about our location and our education typically whenever they want to come somewhere, because they know those are the big factors in terms of their success as companies. And so to think about what Ready Ready's doing in that pipeline of success has huge ramifications for our community. And then as a city government, how we continue to be mindful and aware of this, and continue to be mindful and aware of things such as transportation and transit services that can either support or hinder the progress of that pipeline development. And so I love it because all these many pieces work together in terms of a system. There's a lot of learning that we're all doing all at the same time. And so I've just been geeked. I know, I think Chairman Hudson, you alluded to last time, your wife, who, and forgive me, I think she's a pediatrician, right? And I mean, I know you know this, you all probably talk about this all the time. And so to be able to understand this from the systems level and what a government, we've got a stake in seeing this stuff done right, because high pointers for years to come, if they're going to be tax-paying high pointers, they got to first get through early childhood. And there are better chances of starting school the right way, allows us to have a greater chance in terms of a more prosperous high point. So, Sharice, thank you for that, and just thank you for all the incredible work that Ready Ready's doing. Shout out to Duke Endowment and Blue Meridian to make that kind of investment. You talk about public-private partnerships, man, we would love to know that a private donor somewhere is dumping this kind of money into our community. Sorry, dumping is not the right word, investing into our community in that kind of way. Because truly, we're seeing the impact, we're seeing that learning, and I just think it's awesome. So,
Absolutely. My wife is lead at Ocala, Novant Pediatrics, Ocala, so I know your program very, very well. Something that's changed in medicine that I've witnessed for many years is once medicine became corporate and it became top-heavy, the bottom doesn't talk nearly as much. I mean, my wife is a pediatrician that no longer attends births. If you can believe, she doesn't deliver, she's not at deliveries anymore, and that's not by her choice, that's by corporate. The corporate has changed that. So the conversation between OBs and pediatricians is not nearly what it used to be. She's just not present. And I'm grateful that you said, if you want to find a child, find them at the doctor's office, because that's absolutely true. It doesn't matter nationality, race, ethnic, economics. Everybody loves their children. They will come to the doctor. If they have a doctor's appointment, they will come to it. So I'm grateful that you know that and acknowledge it, because she said that for years, that we have them. It's a captive audience. They're here. Please use us. And you do very, very well. There are so many organizations, as you said, that think that what they have is a great, great program. And you're right, they are great, great programs, but there are always holes with programs. So we as a community have learned collaborative effort is the way to go. Greater High Point Food Alliance, those types of organizations, Ready for Life, these are essential now, and you do great work. I know your work well. I hear your all's name often, so your work is greatly appreciated. Transportation as well. You're right. That's the thing that she says number one. That's the number one obstacle to health is transportation. So I'm glad you're here. So if we can find a way to fill that piece of the puzzle in, it helps every citizen in High Point. So thank you for being here. I greatly appreciate your work.
Wonderful.
Well, you're on the spot, Brett. I mean, you know.
It's very interesting. I appreciate all you're doing for the community. I love the efficiencies you're trying to create. I think it's important in your comment about not just throwing money at a program presentation because it sounds good. I like the fact that you're trying to do some behind-the-scenes depth work. Can you go, is your program still up? Is it still here? Can you get that back up?
Let's see.
To the very first part where you showed the percentages right there.
This one? Sure.
You know, we've noticed this for a long time, but you have the word literacy in several of these. Do these numbers come to you from standardized testing reports you get?
That's a great question. So right now, the best assessment that we have is what we call the dynamic indicators for basic early literacy, which is also called DIBELS. And DIBELS is basically a simple assessment that is provided by kindergarten teachers when children are entering the classroom. And they are really kind of assessing whether or not children know certain words or can identify certain shapes or I would say animals, things of that nature. And, you know, there could potentially be some bias in this assessment. One could be with language. So if it's a language literacy assessment, if you have children where English is not their first language, then you already know that you're going to see some gaps. And so that could possibly be contributing to the number that we see with our Hispanic Latino children and that percentage. And then the other thing is there could also be bias in how each teacher administers the assessment. But that is the best that we have, and most counties or school systems administer this. And so that's the tool that we're going to use moving forward to assess kindergarten preparedness. Will I say that assesses social emotional development? No, and I think that's a key factor. Is it going to assess some of the mental health factors that children face? No, it's basically focused on literacy. It doesn't look at any math or counting. So I wouldn't say it's the end-all be-all for kindergarten preparedness, but it's the best that we have.
Okay. Well, I don't know if the resources are there, but these numbers, at least from a color perspective, you mentioned that where the white numbers were and versus people of color, and we have more work to do there. So I think if there is a way to look into some of those nuances of why those gaps are there, and then keep in mind that whites trail Asians in this. So even looking at, well, why is that there? Then that can give you some more specific, if you will, if you know, to the family makeup, to the economics or whatever you want to look at. I know when my daughter was going, they were trying to hold her back from kindergarten to first grade because they said she couldn't count to 100. Well, they called us and went through all this stuff, and we finally went and sat with the teacher and said, well, what are you asking her? And she says, well, I ask her every day, would you like to count to 100? And she says, no. And we said, well, try this. Tell her she has to count to 100. And she counted to 100. So those little things like that can be reflecting in numbers.
You're exactly right. And I think that's something we're going to look into as we start shifting from our focus on prenatal to age 3 to ages 3 to 5. And I think this is where we're going to start seeing a lot of those situations that you're referring to, not just in school, but also in these child care centers. And as children are transitioning from the preschool phase to kindergarten, we see a lot of learning loss there, but also just that transition from being in this preschool setting and then kindergarten school system comparison to a child care setting is very different. And so how do we make sure the children are still able to succeed? So yes, you raise a very important point.
I appreciate, I'm very impressed with what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Great to have you here with us.
Thank you all.
Our second item is a discussion of our transportation expansion. This is Mr. Venable coming up to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the City Council. I'm going to give you a brief update today on our expanded transit service. You guys have heard about this for a couple of years now, so I just want to give you an update and kind of tell you where we are in the time frame as far as getting those improvements or those expanded services and new services implemented. So as I mentioned, we have two new routes that we're proposing, Route 22 and Route 26. We have an expanded service on Route 25. We also have some other minor route adjustments to the other routes as well, and then as I mentioned, I'll touch on the timeline there. Route 22, we call it West Lex Connector. It's basically a connection along Lexington Avenue from basically Westchester Key Apartments on the west end over to Ralph Lauren, the call center and warehouse on the eastern side. You see the weekday operation schedule there from 5:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. We currently don't operate that late, so as part of the expanded service is running those transit routes later in the evenings on the weekday routes. And then on Saturdays from 8:15 to 6:15 with 1 hour headways. This is a map of that service. 22 you see on the left side of the screen there. That's Westchester Drive with Westchester Key Apartments. Obviously it goes along Lexington Avenue, turns down Enterprise to Cedro to the Ralph Lauren site. Route 26, we call this the Northern Circulator. It provides service to high-density residential areas in High Point, connects along a commercial corridor, anchors along North Main Street. Saturday service will extend over to the Oak Hollow Mall area and Target, as well as residential and recreational areas along James Road, Oakview Rec Center, and things like that. We have 6 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. on weekdays with half-hour headways, and then Saturdays from 8:15 to 6:15 p.m. This is a map of that service, so you can see as it heads up Main Street, comes down Hartley Drive there, goes over Ingleside, comes out west over to kind of where Hartley comes in there now currently, goes to Old Plank Road up to the north, and then back down Main Street. It would tie over on Old Winston Road, back to Hartley Drive, University there. And you see the expansion that goes, or the service that goes around the Oak Hollow Mall area and up to the Oakview Rec Center. That's the Saturday service, and then the weekday service for that is actually being handled by Route 10. So that's how that will be handled during the weekday service. An expanded service is Route 25, it's GTCC Jamestown. Obviously, it would run from the terminal, transportation terminal, out to GTCC. It would run along Old Greensboro Road, East Lexington, Old Greensboro Road, and out to West Main Street in Jamestown. It currently operates on 8-hour trips on weekdays with 90 to 100-minute headways from 7:15 a.m. to 5:15 p.m. The proposed service will increase that and provide 6 additional trips with consistent hour-long headways, and then weekday time frame from 7:15 to 9:15 p.m. That's a heavily used service there. And that's a map showing that service going out Lexington to Greensboro, Old Greensboro Road, and then to Main Street, West Main Street in Jamestown. Also talked about route adjustments. So this is just a listing of some of the other adjustments, some minor adjustments there. You see some of the routes are being eliminated. So those are routes that are redundant. I guess you have other routes that can handle those. So our transit staff have looked at those to kind of ways where we can combine some routes and get rid of some of that service that's already being provided by another route, and then it provides us the ability to expand in other needed locations as well. So, and I'll just talk about timeline. So obviously we've talked about this for a few years now. The fare changes were proposed in 2018. Transit Service, High Point Transit System applied for congestion mitigation air quality funding and was awarded that in 2018. That funding was available in 2019. The council approved it at that time. Obviously, so what's taken place since then, and why is this service kind of on hold currently? COVID had an impact on everything, transit being one of the major impacts of that. And then because of that, and then other issues, there's a driver shortage. I think Damon DeCane talked about this at our last meeting, that there's 4 service, transit services in the Triad area, and we're trying to all compete. So you have 5 now because Burlington has the service as well. So we're all trying to compete for those qualified drivers. It's difficult finding that. We have issues also with new regulations as far as the requirements and the cost for obtaining your CDL and your passenger certification for that. So that's all the things that we're trying to look at from a staffing perspective, are the things that we can offer with the city that can get folks in, incentives or things like that, as far as with the cost for obtaining that CDL, is that something we can look at, maybe a reimbursement for that moving forward? So a lot of options on the table, but it's difficult, honestly, just trying to keep drivers now to drive for our existing service. So that's kind of the main reason for the implementation not being in place at this point. So all this information is on our website. If you go out to the High Point Transit System website, there's a survey, and you have all the listing of all the routes, all the information, the changes. There's also some fare changes proposed and things like that as well. So I encourage you guys to take a look at that and look at that information. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. And if I can't, I can talk to our transit manager, and she can definitely give me the information.
Thank
you
you.
guys
I
need it.
greatly appreciate the addition of the rec center there on James.
Yeah.
That's going to Oakview Rec Center. That's a good addition. Thank you for that. Are there ways to place stops at the Greenway as well?
Yeah, we can look at that. So once we put this into service, we'll have to identify those stop locations.
Right.
And that's all part of it. And I know they've already looked at some of those locations, but we can definitely take a look at the greenways and if there's stops that we can put in those locations as well. So we can
Yeah,
definitely
our
look at that.
Greenway is an awesome, it's an
Yeah,
awesome amenity
it
to the
is.
city, and I always encourage, any exercise we can get, I'd love to have those stops added, but thank you for including the rec center.
Sure.
Any further comments?
Yeah, so Greg, thank you for coming in and giving us the brief session. You mind backing up a couple?
Oh, yeah.
You didn't learn from the last one, did you?
Can we go forward one? Yeah, so just want to look at this for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, most of those routes, or a lot of them, we have maintained existing routes, so not all of those are changing. You do have the ones that are listed on there. There is slight modifications to some of those, and as I mentioned before, you have those eliminated routes that we can cover with existing routes that are already out there in place. You have some overlap on some of that, so that, and I can get you more detail on some of that information as well, if you would like that.
The Northern Circulator.
Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, Route 26?
Sure, I can go back to let me go back to that map. I believe that's it.
So this is what we mean when we say Northern Circulator?
Correct. Yeah, so if you, that's the Northern Circulator. So that's looking at the northwest part of High Point there, Old Plank Road. You see the route that goes through Laurel Oak there. That's the residential development to the west. Along Hartley there, you have several condos, apartment complexes, heavily residential through there that currently has no transit service at all. There is no access. I know that Hartley Drive, when we completed that project, that was a previous bond project. So when that one went in and we installed those sidewalks, that's probably one of the heaviest used sidewalk locations in High Point. I think there's a lot of pedestrians out there, and I think that's a big need for providing transit service as well. So
That first stop there on Hartley is also the YMCA. So that's
yes, it is the YMCA. Yeah.
Yeah. So I probably have a number of questions, Greg.
Sure.
And admittedly, I know that we probably talked about this a few times. So I think my focus is on like, how do we ensure what we're looking to do, like we actually are able to accomplish some of that? I recognize some of the challenges we've had with hiring.
Yeah.
You mentioned that we may have some solutions to mitigate some of that. I know there's difficulties with the new CDL requirements. There's difficulties with some of the insurances that we have to keep in terms of who we can hire.
Yep.
So I am curious about that in terms of real actionable steps we're going to take, I guess, to mitigate some of that.
Yeah.
And admittedly, I probably have more to this question, but I'll pause because I'm thinking about it. Yes, I'm thinking about the short term, but I'm also thinking about something else long term that I'll get to right after this.
Right. So, you know, I think our transit staff is doing what they can. There is difficulty, like I mentioned. It's just, you're trying to compete for that same talent pool. And, you know, the limitations that kind of with the cost increases of obtaining your CDL license. I know that High Point Transit System is working with GTCC to try to get some of that taken care of, or using their instructors to do some of that training at maybe a lower cost. So I don't have all the information to provide for you today, but I can definitely speak with Angela and you know, get some information for you on what they're doing, what she's trying to do to attract those drivers. So, you know, transit driving it's a little bit of an issue just because of the schedule, right? So a lot of drivers have to work a split schedule. So you kind of come in the morning, you're off during the middle of the day, then you have to come back at night and work. So they do some split schedules, some split shift stuff. They also do, obviously you're working on the weekends, and again, with the expanded service. So all of our routes will expand their hours of operation until 9:15 would be the latest. There's a couple of routes that run that late. I think some of them stop at 8:15, some at 8:30. But so, you know, proposing that extended service, you know, you're also going to have drivers that are going to have to drive later, or have additional drivers on hand to take care of those additional needs. So,
Can I ask a question right
Sure.
there?
Yep.
It's also a requirement that they have to have a 2-year,
yes.
correct? I mean,
Yeah, well,
that's the
that-
real
that's kinda-
problem, is
we want-
You can't just go to school and become.
Right, we want
You have to
yes,
have 2 years.
2 years of experience.
record, yes.
Correct, yes. So it's not like we can just hire them in and,
Right.
but yeah, that is correct. That is what we require on our applications is 2
And
years.
that's also,
And
that's also.
we
if
talked
I
about
may-
that before in terms of our insurance.
Yeah,
Like, part of
that's
what
an
we-
insurance requirement, and we did meet with our insurance carrier a little over a year ago, I want to say, and that's a requirement that is imposed by the insurance company.
Where are they supposed to get that experience for 2 years?
Well, best
doesn't have
case
to be
scenario
2
is
years.
they have
That's
years of
all.
experience elsewhere. There was some flexibility in that, but it would come at a very steep cost.
But it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
passenger experience, does it? It can be just,
It can be, to my
It can be
knowledge, it can be
delivery.
CDL
It's
experience.
CDL
They
experience,
have
and
to
then
have
you
that endorsement.
You have to have that
on the
passenger
CDL
endorsement, but
license.
yeah, CDL experience.
So I think, so again, we had this conversation last year. We literally talked about all this. And Greg, I know you weren't in this role when we
Correct.
had this, so I'm
Yep.
not, this isn't any knock on you at all, I promise. But we had this conversation last year. And we talked about the drivers, and Britt, the question you just asked, Wesley, the question you just went into, it's the same exact stuff we talked about last year in terms of insurance. And the cost that it is, that if we have to have folks wait 2 years before they can start working, that's because of what the current insurance is. And then we said, well, it's steep. And I think we stopped at steep. I don't think we went to the next point of saying, well, how steep is it? And I think for me, if I'm going to say it's steep, I think the responsible thing is to measure how steep that is compared to the opportunity cost of not actually implementing the expansions and some of the things that we have laid out here. And so I'd be curious to know, if we say steep, what does that mean in terms of insurance on each bus, that I guess it's going to go up for each bus or each driver? What's that collective cost year over year? And then looking at that, I think we need to know that number, but then I think, again, the other responsible thing to do is to recognize there's an opportunity cost of us not doing this expansion, and there is a main inhibitor to doing the expansion, which means that if there's an opportunity cost of not doing the expansion and there's a main inhibitor, then I have to look at those two costs, the cost of the steeper insurance versus the opportunity cost of not doing the expansion, because ultimately, it sounds like that is the big thing standing in our way. And that's a short-term thing. So I would love to look at the numbers in terms of insurance, and then be able to have kind of a conversation about, okay, if we have to increase insurance by this much, is it worth being able to address the opportunity cost we have of not being able to give the requisite transportation services to our residents, right?
Yep.
That's a short-term thing. The next piece, I think that is important, and I recognize that when I first got on council, I asked about this, and it was kind of like hushed a little bit because it was like no one wants to talk about it. But I feel like we need to talk about it, which is that we are never going to reach any real level of efficiency as long as we don't want to have some kind of regional approach to transportation that is a little more intentional and really more direct than what we're offering right now. Because quite frankly, what I hear from residents are that travel times of trying to get to jobs in other places are ridiculous. Because if you live, for example, in the ward that I represent, which is on East High Point, which quite frankly is really close to Jamestown and to Greensboro, but if you wanted to get, for example, into a job that's right in West Greensboro, right, which is ostensibly from my house, I could drive there in about 8 to 10 minutes. But if you want to get on a bus to get there, it's a multi-hour ride because of all the extensions and connections you have to do. Yep. And it's because ultimately High Point and Greensboro, we don't do enough regional connecting to make that happen. That's one thing, right? And that's, you could say that about where my ward is. You could say the same thing probably about, I think, where Ward 4 is, where Kernersville and Winston-Salem and so many other things. Like, we have cities that we touch, but because of the way our stuff is set up, you could live right next to Winston-Salem, but have to get an extension that connects you somewhere else that gets you back to another extension in Winston-Salem that then gets you to that ride and your job. And God forbid, if the weather's good, you walk there in 30 minutes. If the weather sucks, you got to take 4 hours now to get to work. That's a real conversation piece I think we need to have in terms of the opportunity costs for regional transportation. I think the other thing I just heard, Greg, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we say that there's transit services in the area, and right now there's competitive hiring in terms of transit services, well, in some ways, if there was a regionalized approach, and again, I'm not the expert here, I'd love to look at if that regionalized approach doesn't help us at least begin to mitigate that regional competitiveness in terms of hiring. Because ultimately, I think you're not going to need as many routes because you're going to do more connecting between city to city, and you may find that the person who's only getting so many drivers on their bus along this part of their city, well, if they're also connecting right into this part of High Point, right, because there's more of that regional connectedness, well, now, as opposed to looking to steal them from that city to come work and only do that route for us, if we had a better regional approach, maybe they're that route that just does both of that. And there's a way, I think, for those maps to be done. And if I'm not mistaken, I was told that so many years ago, there was some regional assessing and map drawing of how we could do this. But I do think it got, if I can just say, sorry for the record, I think it got a little political because no one wanted to really talk about what it looks like to do regional transportation, because it would mean each city saying, we're willing to push our cars into the middle of the table to work together. And so I'm going out on a limb saying I hope High Point, we're ready to start having those conversations. And even if that means we have to be the forefront in terms of having those conversations, I think it's the responsible thing to do, because we're talking about what is best for High Pointers, and we're talking about issues that we've not been able to get over the hump on for many years. Because much of this, I can recall when I was a much younger man hearing about these transportation expansions and how much we needed them and how much we have not done them in 2022. So those are all my thoughts. I know there were a lot of thoughts. I know some of that is short-term stuff that we're going to look at. Some of that's longer-term stuff. But I would love to, I guess, in the short term, I would love to, for the record, if this committee, if we're going to talk about transit, can we look at where those conversations were taking place regionally? I don't know if it was with PART or if it was PTRC, and where they were trying to have those conversations amongst our 12 counties of how we can have a better regionalized approach. I would love to look at that to see where High Point's part was in being involved in that. And at some point, I know it's going to take us having to talk to some of the other municipalities about it, but I'll tell you, when I'm in Greensboro and I talk to a Greensboro person, a Greensboro City Council member, they say the same exact thing. They say if we could be regionalized, it would make so much sense. In Winston-Salem, they say the same exact thing. Even county officials say the same exact thing. And somehow, we're all saying regionalized is more efficient, it cuts down on competitive hiring, it makes it shorter travel times, probably makes the most sense, but when it gets to the nitty of the gritty, are we willing to put our cards in the middle of the table with everyone else's and be willing to build that system? So I'd love to see where that last stood, if we were ever involved in those conversations, what that looked like, and then at some point, see what it's like to take those action steps for a reconvening of that kind of thing. I know that's much more long-term, but truth be told, I don't think I would sit here in good conscience and say all the other stuff we're talking about in terms of keeping us siloed off the way we are, it's gonna actually get us to serve High Point residents better. I couldn't say that in good conscience, because I think regional transportation actually is the solution.
Yeah, I think from a regional perspective, you're correct. I mean, there has been discussions in the past, starting with the Piedmont Authority for Regional Transportation, and it comes up all the time with what we do with the MPO, that regional collaboration is continuous. But again, it's getting the elected officials together to discuss what the needs are and what does this area as a whole, what does it see for the future of transportation? So PART has provided that regional connection, and you're right, you have to make multiple connections if you want to go from High Point to downtown Greensboro. There's not many locations, I think maybe the Route 25 that connects at GTCC. Obviously, Greensboro makes that connection too, so you can make the connection where you transfer at that point. But yeah, you're correct, and we can look into, I know there's been some discussions at PART with all jurisdictions, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point, about kind of moving forward and a long-term goal of what is transportation like for the Triad region as a whole. So, you know, I'm definitely willing to talk to, we have our PART, our MPO board chair is on the PART board, so we can discuss that information and just see what those conversations are like in the other jurisdictions as well, so.
I appreciate that. And again, Greg, I'm sorry, because I realized that my 8-minute monologue felt like it was all dumping on you.
No.
I'll do what I did earlier. I'll replace the word dumping and talk about investing in the future of our city in terms of where we're going with this. Greg, I know you're new into your role, and I appreciate everything you've done to kind of answer all these questions.
Sure.
And appreciate the work we're going to continue to do to explore this and hopefully make sure those actionable strides. So,
Thank you.
So, Mr. Venable, Mr. Olmedo, could we do December? Could we do a report in December back to this committee of what you found? Will that give you enough time to put something together? Fantastic. Great suggestions. Thank you.
You need to include, in my opinion, you need to include the ridership numbers.
yeah.
Yeah.
Will do.
Good.
And while we're looking at, thank you, you actually just made me think of that, Brett. The ridership numbers, but also I feel like at one point when we talked about ridership, we also talked about the size of the vehicles we're using and how I think we have multiple sizes or we only have one size. So we'd love to know the numbers on like where we have big buses versus not so big
Bus capacity on
and
that?
how we're using, and not just buses, if we're using vans or whatever.
Right.
'Cause I think that's also part of it in terms of efficiency.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Great information. Our last item today is about commercial shared use kitchens, which I'm assuming is Ms. Galante. Why you sat through the hour-long meeting.
I do not have a PowerPoint presentation for you today, but I think the theme of today is collaboration. We had collaboration on
seems to be that way.
education, we need collaboration on transit, and we need collaboration on a commercial shared use kitchen here in High Point. I'll give you a little bit of background. This all started in 2018, if you remember, when the city received a technical assistant grant from USEDA through the Smart Growth America Small Scale Manufacturing and Place-Based Economic Development Program. We had Alana Preuss come. We shared this Recast Your City book. I think, Councilman Hudson, you just told me you
Excellent book.
got around to
Highly
reading it.
recommend it if you
And
haven't.
it is an excellent book, and it really focuses on how small-scale manufacturing and entrepreneurship in communities can really lift up a community. And the report identified not only small-scale manufacturing, but it identified the need for a commercial shared-use kitchen in High Point and what that can do for, again, creating those entrepreneurs, especially in the food industry, because that is a very expensive industry for people to get into because of the cost of the kitchen equipment. So a small committee was meeting, city staff and community stakeholders met numerous times after Alana Preuss was here, but they were unable to gain widespread support, interest, and traction on the project. And then unfortunately, COVID hit. So the group stopped meeting. In '21, High Point was selected to participate in the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Program that is focused on cross-boundary collaboration and how that can make difficult, complex city issues come together to fruition. So the creation of the commercial shared use kitchen was identified as a priority issue for that collaboration track. And in February, the Bloomberg Initiative was kicked off with 40 community stakeholders gathering in this room to talk about how we can get a commercial shared use kitchen going in High Point. Over the course of the full day, stakeholders were oriented to the problem. They were given the opportunity to discuss the varied perspectives and the work that needed to be done. They were guided through exercises to understand more fully what is at stake and what could be done better in the future. And it also served as a forum to express a commitment to work together as a team and bring this project to fruition. In April, a team of 8 people from that stakeholder group were selected, both city staff and private sector stakeholders, went to New York for a week-long intense training on this cross-boundary collaboration. The team was given the tools and techniques on how to approach a complex problem, how to form a team of people with diverse expertise, and how to take a collaborative approach to tackling problems and executing a solution to drive change in our communities. Also in April, we submitted a FY23 appropriations request to Senators Burr and Tillis and Representative Manning. Representative Manning's request made it through into the House Financial Services Appropriations Bill in June, and it was unfortunately reduced from our original request of just over $3 million to $2 million, but I just checked with Jennifer Emo yesterday, and the omnibus appropriations bill that includes the request is hopefully going to be passed before the end of this year. So we will know if we have some initial seed money. And again, I say that's seed money because $2 million is not enough to make this project happen. We estimated back in April that it was going to be almost $4 million to make this project work, which would have to have some local match along with those federal dollars. And we have been meeting with other commercial kitchen operators, and they say, you know, take your estimate and add 60%. So $4 million is likely not enough. But we have, in that estimate, we put together a desired size of a kitchen of 12,000 square feet, which is estimated to serve 15 entrepreneurs at any one given time. We have looked at multiple sites for a kitchen. Nothing has been decided. At some point, if we get this funding, that's going to be one of the biggest decisions that we need to make, is where do we want to focus on putting this kitchen. We met with a for-profit kitchen just yesterday, learned a whole lot about the different types of kitchen, and through the Department of Ag, through the USDA, and through public health. And they have all of those under one roof, and I think they said it's in 9,000 square feet. And they are overwhelmed with the need that they have that's coming from Winston, coming from Greensboro, coming from High Point. They are very complimentary of us in the work that we're doing. They see that we are trying to be a true collaborative effort in bringing all of the stakeholders to the table. They're interested in helping us. We don't know what that looks like, what that means, but we have different groups in this community that are interested in the ag. The Growing High Point is, I would say, they're the ag group. We've always been looking at that commercial shared use kitchen that falls in the public health group. I would say that our economic development group is in that USDA group, which is the production kitchen. So I think we also need to decide, what do we want? What type of kitchen do we want? And that will help drive a lot of decisions. There's different costs to those different kitchens, and Short Street helped us understand what's the most expensive. It is that public health kitchen that's the most expensive because of the kitchen equipment that you need. So again, we need to decide, what do we want, where do we want it, and then who is going to operate it. I think the city is initially, we want to be that seed money, but we don't want to be in the business of operating a commercial shared use kitchen. So how can we participate in getting that kicked off? So where are we now? That team of 8 has been working over the summer to refine the mission, vision, and objectives. There's a handout in front of you that has that. And we're also meeting with different kitchens, as I mentioned. There's another flyer there on October 13th. There is a nonprofit kitchen that we've heard a lot about over in Hillsborough, so we're going to go and visit that. I invite you to join us if you can. We've also been meeting with individual stakeholders to identify what are they trying to do and how can they be a player in this effort. And as a result, we've expanded that list of 40 stakeholders that we had back here in January to well over 40 people. We are also updating a entrepreneur checklist. Our small business center at the library had an entrepreneur checklist, but it had gotten out of date. So we're working on updating that. And we're not only working on that just as the city, but we're reaching out to the private nonprofits that also do that. So we're talking with the Chamber, we're talking with GTCC, we're talking with Thrive, and they're all looking at this checklist together so that we can kind of have that step-by-step process for entrepreneurs, especially in the food industry, and what steps do they need to take, and then we'll all be giving out that same information. So if you go to any one of those places, you're gonna get the same response. We are also, we just finished up conducting a survey to try to establish that need. It's very hard to get people to respond to these surveys. We got 37 responses, which honestly is huge, because a lot of these folks are afraid to respond to a survey because they may be doing something in their home kitchen, and they don't want to out themselves that they're doing something in their home kitchen because they're not allowed to. But we are in the process of tailoring the responses to that survey, and we'll be interested to see what they say. We are also using a software that we have to track folks that are leaving High Point and going to 4 different kitchens. One of those is the Short Street Kitchen that we mentioned yesterday, City Kitch, which is also a for-profit kitchen in Greensboro, Out of the Garden, which is also in Greensboro, a nonprofit kitchen, and the Enterprise Center in Winston-Salem. So we're trying to create data there, again, to justify the need. But after talking to Short Street yesterday, they're like, it is the proverbial build it and they will come. They have lots of folks coming from High Point. We're also trying to create that database of food entrepreneurs. So if any of those organizations that I mentioned before has somebody call them and say, hey, I'm interested in, we're gathering their name and their contact information, and we're going to input it into one central database. Again, I've mentioned the other kitchens that we've been researching. One that model that we really like is AB Tech Small Business Center in Asheville, and that is run by the Technical Community College. So we have GTCC as a big stakeholder in this effort as well. Blue Ridge Ventures is a nonprofit kitchen run in Western North Carolina that we've looked at. Commonwealth Kitchen in Boston is a nonprofit kitchen that, again, a trait that we really like is they opened in one of the most distressed census tracts. That's something that we're looking to do here too, because we want to reach those people that otherwise are not being reached. Short Street, I just mentioned, and the Piedmont Food Processing Center is the one that we're going to go visit in October. So what are our next steps? We're going to pull a new core team together. One thing we learned in New York is the 8 people that we brought may not be the 8 people that we need to lead this effort. So we're in the process of reorganizing that core team and hope to have them meet later this month. And then in early 23, we want to reconvene that larger stakeholder group. Just a few bullet points of interest that I've collected over time about commercial shared use kitchens and what they can do and what we're looking to do. Again, we want this kitchen to eventually be self-sustaining, but it's going to need us to help it get going. It provides opportunities for food entrepreneurs to scale their food production. It fosters entrepreneurship, especially for traditional underserved population. It is difficult for small businesses and entrepreneurs to start, grow, and sustain. So those in the food industry, because of that high cost that I talked about. Small business and entrepreneurs can be the backbone of a community's economy. They can help build personal and community wealth for a larger segment of people. Supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs can create more self-sustaining community. Entrepreneurs and small businesses help create a unique place, a sense of place where others may want to visit, live, and work. Be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Kalani. I'll open it up to either. Great work, great report. Glad this is still in the,
I'll make a comment on one of your last comments. I think you might have been reading it, that small businesses, and you used the word can be, some of us have been espousing for a long, long time that they can't be, that they have been.
Yes.
They were the backbone of our medical until we corporatized it. They were the backbone of this city before we corporatized it and offshored it. So make no mistake, we're circling back around
Yep.
to what we gave away, and we're paying a really huge cost to try to get there.
Yeah, so first I'll say how much I appreciate this presentation. This was helpful. I know that this work, as you said, for the past couple of years have been, I think, matriculating through that process. That initiative with the Bloomberg Group, I know that was really helpful, and then all the studying that's been done since then. I'll say, in looking at these objectives, these seem really comprehensive, and I think that kind of path that we're going to chart is going to be great. I am curious, as we get this going, figuring out, like you say, the groups who need to be at the table, and ultimately who ends up owning this is going to be huge. Also, location is going to be huge as well. And could that work in conjunction, I guess, with other things? So I love what this is. I think the plan is a bona fide plan. As you were speaking, one thing that came to mind, I was looking at the mission and vision here, and really just supporting those entrepreneurs as they want to start, grow, and sustain. This is probably a small piece, and in some ways, I imagine in a future state in which we have this initiative fully fleshed out and running, that this small piece would be something that I think we'll be mindful of. But people who end up starting businesses in general have a process to navigate. But if they start food businesses, they have, as you said before, particularly expensive and time prohibitive, I think that's the right word I'm looking for, in terms of the process that it takes for them to get through it, right? So I think about, for example, the folks who are in the food hall, throughout their process of getting going, I try to stay in communication with a lot of them, and many of them shared the same sentiments, which was that they're so excited about our downtown, they love that High Point's committed to this work, and in fact, as they needed to navigate processes, the city actually did work with them to do good things, but then once they got through the city part, and maybe they got through their financing part that they needed to do with the bank and some of the other stuff, they ran up against this other big sort of brick wall, which is public health, which I know is not within our domain. But what it told me and what they said was, if there is a risk of businesses who have the right sort of, everything needed to become a great business, but that becomes as prohibitive as it has been, people said they spent months going through all the other stuff, hit that brick wall because they weren't aware of all of the county stuff. And then that kind of just slowed them down. They've drained money doing that. And we're at the risk of saying, screw it, I'm just not going to open up. That's a risk that we run when we're a community that's trying to reinvigorate and, as we say, support them as they start, grow, and sustain. If that becomes our mission, then even though we don't own the process of public health, we don't own that process of ensuring that folks can be approved through that health food process, it almost in some ways becomes incumbent upon us, if our vision is the success of these businesses, that what can we do, whether it's allowing folks to have a clearer sort of path to say, oh, we just heard that you want to start a food business. We want to be very, very clear of like all the steps you got to go through. Some of these have nothing to do with the city, but we want to tell you all the things, all the tips and tricks. And in fact, we have a community partner, pick any stakeholder who's here, who's going to help folks navigate that process. I know it's, again, it's outside our purview because we don't do that public health and food stuff, but it stands as one of those factors that I think could actually end up getting in the way and kind of stop some folks from going down that road, or if not stop them, just make it really, really lengthy. So I almost wonder if that's at least being considered. I know everything you just said about the kitchen and all of that. I mean, a lot of that, if someone's using the kitchen, obviously they're going to come right in and be solid. But I am curious about, I guess, for businesses getting started, is there a shorter term thing now before this kitchen gets started up that we know a business is coming and we want to mitigate the risk of them hitting that proverbial public health wall?
I have heard very much the same thing that you've heard: public health, public health, public health. They're that brick wall, they're that barrier, they're that hurdle. So we need to get them to the table and get them to the table early and get them to put those things down on paper for us so that we can share those with folks so they can know walking in, you know, here's not only your steps that you got to get through for all that, but here's the steps for public health, and here's who has to go through those steps. Because again, there's the Department of Ag, USDA, and Public Health. So there's some that have different levels of what the regulations are. Those are things we need to try to get down on paper and understand so that people know what they have to do and can get through those steps. And let's try to lower those barriers and those hurdles through providing the information, at least. Again, we don't have control over what they're going to ask for, but at least we can make it clear to them what they're going to have to provide and what they're going to have to do.
Yeah. And being proactive, I think about that. It just says to folks, we really care so much about your business that we want to, as best as we can, provide the resources that at least help you get closer towards streamlining this process. So you know everything up front, because there's some things that folks could be taking care of with the county while they're taking care of stuff with the city and with their finance and all that stuff. What I found was folks, they were chunking things out. By the time they got to step D, ABC they got done in 1 month. Step D took 6 months. Yep. And then it was a long and arduous process apparently.
And that may be something that goes into our consideration of what type of kitchen do we want to open up first off, because that is the most difficult and the most expensive. So do we want to, and this is a decision that has to be made, do we want to start with a different type of kitchen that is easier and lower cost and easier entry and work our way into that public health heavy regulated type kitchen?
Or maybe we need to get that list and then put heat on these people and telling them they're making it a barrier to entry.
Yep.
Which is no different than what big corporations do to small corporations to try to keep them out. I mean,
I was going to say, I've been in business almost 30 years now, and when I started in the 80s, the municipal government was regulatory. So when you would go down to get a permit, they were strictly regulatory. They weren't thinking large scale. There was no such thing as public development that was at the forefront. You know, I mean, my son's getting sustainable development right now, and if you told me that 30 years ago, I'm like, what the heck is sustainable development? But it's a great degree with, you know, great potential of the future. We never would have thought 30 years from now government would be the planning and be the hub that everybody else goes to say, here's what we want in 20 years, and things constantly change. You say about the small businesses, you know, small businesses 30 years ago, build a small business so that you can be bought out and make your money and retire. That was the mindset. It's so changed now that businesses will collaborate. I mean, I have other businesses that I can give business to, and they do the same thing to me. It is a different world that we live in right now. So I'm so glad to hear you talk about collaboration. Groups like Hayden Harmon Foundation, you know, Growing High Point. Who would think Growing High Point would come to the city and say, we want to help the city, and we're working as a city, not as a bunch of separate satellites. It's a great model. It's a model that works really, really well right now. So I'm so grateful to hear the word collaboration used so much today. So thank you for what you're doing with this. Anything further?
Not on this item, but just, I was gonna say 2 things before we adjourn the meeting.
Sure.
Thank you.
If nothing else, thank you, Ms. White. Go ahead.
First thing is, just want to give a big shout out, happy birthday to Ryan Ferguson. I know it's his birthday. Ryan, happy birthday, man. We appreciate you.
29 years of happiness.
29 looks good.
Also, want to congratulate Britt. Apparently, there's a wedding this weekend, and granted, it's not his wedding, but he will be officiating the wedding of his daughter, which I think is incredible. down in Charleston. So safe travels, Britt, and congratulations to you and your daughter. And then also, I'm excited because November 5th, we're doing that ribbon cutting for City Lake, right? We're on target to do this ribbon cutting?
It would be nice.
Yeah? Tell me now, because I've been making big plans. I've been calling everybody.
Wait till we put the press release.
Well, I wasn't sure if we'd have another meeting before that, but I guess right now it's on the calendar. And if we continue to do that ribbon cut, I think that's so awesome, a big project that we've talked about for years, and it come to fruition, and so excited about that, so.
Yes. Yes, anything further? If not, thank you all so much. A very, very good meeting today. We stand adjourned.